The Pinewood Diner didn't belong to this century. Its chipped green booths, flickering neon sign, and sun-bleached daily special board hadn't changed since 1983. Locals called it the heart of Willow Creek, though lately, its heartbeat was faint. Most days, only a few regulars shuffled in for burnt coffee and memories. John Harper, CEO of Harper's Family Diners, a national chain of spotless, soulless establishments, stood across the street wearing borrowed jeans, a second-hand flannel, and the name Mike stitched crookedly on a faded busboy apron. His watch alone cost more than this whole place made in a month, but he'd left that behind. This wasn't a PR stunt. No cameras, no executives. Just a man trying to figure out why this one diner, the very first in his family's empire, was bleeding money and reputation. But deep down, it wasn't just numbers that brought him back. It was the whisper of a name, Pinewood. His mother, Grace, once ran this diner like a general with flour on her apron and kindness in her eyes. She used to say, "A good diner doesn't serve food, it serves comfort." They hadn't spoken in over a decade. John walked in. A bell above the door gave a tired jingle. The smell of old grease and something cinnamon drifted through the air. The waitress behind the counter didn't look up at first. She was mid-laugh, pouring coffee for a wrinkled man in a Vietnam vet hat. When she finally saw him, her smile didn't falter, but her eyes studied him. "You must be the new guy Greg hired." "Busboy?" He nodded. "Name's Mike." "Well, Mike," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome to the mess. I'm Sarah. Just don't try to fix the dishwasher. It bites." Her kindness wasn't fake. It was practical. Like someone who knew life could fall apart at any moment but chose to show up anyway. She moved with quiet efficiency, balancing 4 plates like a dancer in worn sneakers. Her ponytail was tight, but her face was tired. By noon, John had cleared 6 tables, broken 1 glass, and earned a sarcastic cheer from the cook. Greg, the manager, barely looked at him, just barked orders and flirted with a hostess half his age. Something felt off. But it was the moment John saw the photo on the wall near the restroom that made his breath catch. There, in a frame too dusty to draw attention, was Mama Grace, smiling, arms around 2 young waitresses. One of them was Sarah, the other, gone now. His mother looked older than he remembered, but the warmth in her face hadn't changed. "Hey, Sarah," he asked, wiping the counter. "That woman in the middle, is she still around?" Sarah's eyes softened. "Grace?" "Yeah, she's around. Doesn't work anymore, though. Sick. Real sick." John swallowed hard. She hadn't told him. "Who's helping her?" Sarah hesitated, then smiled too quickly. "Folks pitch in where they can." But John could tell she meant herself, and something about that hit him harder than he expected. The next morning, the Pinewood Diner felt even quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. John, still Mike to everyone, showed up an hour early. He claimed it was to get ahead on dishes, but the truth was messier. He'd barely slept. The image of his mother, sick, alone, and framed on that dusty wall, kept looping in his head. She had raised him in this diner, back when it was packed every weekend, back when she sang while flipping pancakes. But somewhere between college and corporate takeovers, John had stopped returning her calls. She said the diners were becoming too cold, too big. He said she didn't understand growth. The last thing he told her before leaving was, "You care too much about a place that's already dead." Now, standing in its faded kitchen, John felt the weight of those words pressing on his ribs. Sarah arrived just before sunrise. No makeup, eyes red. She didn't say why. She just tied on her apron and went straight to prepping biscuit dough like the world wasn't falling apart. "You're early," she said, not looking up. "Could say the same for you." She shrugged. "Grace had a rough night. I brought her some broth and sat with her for a while. Her appetite's fading again." He opened his mouth to ask more, but Sarah cut in. "You ever take care of someone dying, Mike?" John hesitated. "Not really." "It's like this slow unraveling. Every day they lose a little more of themselves, and you try to act like you're not watching it happen, like you can pour enough soup and smile enough to stop it." Her voice didn't shake. That was what made it worse. John busied himself with wiping the counter. Does she have a family? Sarah paused. She used to. Not anymore. The knife twisted deeper. Just then, Greg barged through the kitchen door, his Bluetooth earpiece flashing. Mike, mop the storage hallway, and for God's sake, stop leaving the fridge ajar. Energy bills don't pay themselves. Sarah's jaw clenched as Greg stormed past. John didn't respond. He grabbed the mop and slipped into the back hallway. It was dim and smelled like mildew. As he sloshed the mop through sticky corners, something caught his eye. A soft click echoed underfoot. He stepped back. One of the old wooden floorboards was loose. John glanced around, nobody in sight. He crouched and pried it up. Beneath it, tucked in an envelope marked with grease fingerprints, were a stack of receipts and a handwritten ledger. It was full of numbers, payouts, names, some scratched out, some not. His stomach dropped. One name appeared over and over. G. Nelson, manager transfer bonuses, vendor kickbacks. Greg. John tucked the envelope into his pocket just as the hallway door creaked open. Sarah peeked in. You okay? John smiled faintly. Yeah, just learning where this place hides its ghosts. Sarah chuckled lightly, but her eyes were still tired. Well, if you find a miracle back there, let me know. As she walked away, John leaned back against the wall. He hadn't found a miracle, not yet, but he had found a trail, and if what he suspected was true, someone was bleeding this diner dry, and it wasn't the woman paying for Mama Grace's treatment. By the third day, John knew how the diner breathed, when the griddle hissed to life, which regulars always asked for decaf but meant full strength, and how Sarah hummed when she thought no one was listening. It was the tune of an old lullaby. He remembered it from somewhere deep in his childhood, though he couldn't quite place it. But the biggest thing John had learned was this. The place wasn't dying from age. It was starving. He spent the day watching, observing, every delivery invoice, every fake repair fee that Greg filed, every sudden cash shortage from the register. John mentally cataloged it all. The embezzlement wasn't just careless. It was a slow, precise bleed. That night, after closing, Sarah sat at the corner booth alone with a worn envelope. She pulled out a bill, stared at it, sighed, and put it back. Her hands trembled, but not from weakness, from exhaustion. John approached with 2 coffees in to-go cups. One for you, he said, placing it gently on the table. No cream, right? Sarah smiled weakly. You notice everything, huh? Just trying to keep up. She looked at him, really looked. You're not like most people Greg hires. I'm not like most people, John admitted with a crooked smile. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah spoke again. Do you ever feel like you're running out of yourself, like you pour and pour into others and one day you realize you've got nothing left for yourself? John swallowed. Yeah, I do. She nodded. Mama Grace was everything to this place, to me. When I was 17 and my stepdad kicked me out, she gave me a cot in the back and told me I was more than what I'd been through. She saved me. John blinked. A cot in the back. That must have been long after he'd left for college. Sarah sipped her coffee, then continued. I'm not family, not by blood, but I owe her my life. She never asked for anything, never even told anyone she was sick. I found her vomiting behind the building one morning, and she begged me not to tell Greg, said he'd let her go, so I stepped in, quietly. John's throat tightened. And the bills? She looked away. Some I paid, some I begged clinics to delay, others I don't even open. I wait tables here all day, then bartend a few nights a week, but it's never enough. It's like putting out a fire with a teacup. You shouldn't have to do this alone, John said, voice lower than usual. I'm not alone, she said. I've got Grace, and the diner, that's enough. She stood, ready to leave, but paused and added softly, You remind me of someone she used to talk about. Her son. Said he was smart but stubborn, built a castle so tall he forgot where he came from. John froze. She still keeps his photo in her Bible. As she disappeared into the kitchen, John sat there, stunned. The woman he was falling into quiet awe of was saving the mother he'd walked away from, and she didn't even know who he was. The next day, the tension at Pinewood Diner was sharper. John had barely stepped through the kitchen door when Greg pulled him aside with that same greasy smirk. "Hey, Mike, you've been nosing around the storage hallway?" John kept his face blank. "Just mopping like you told me." Greg leaned in close enough for John to smell his stale cologne. "Don't get too curious. This ain't a museum. Things go missing when people get too smart." John smiled mildly. "Thanks for the advice." He turned back to work, but inside a storm was brewing. He had spent the night cross-referencing the receipts from the floorboard stash with corporate records from Harper's family diners. The numbers didn't lie. Greg had created a fake maintenance company, G. Nelson Repairs, and funneled money through it for years. Kickbacks, inflated invoices, and silent partners. The man wasn't just lazy, he was a thief. And worse, he was willing to let the entire diner crumble to protect his scheme. John didn't know what hurt more, that Pinewood was falling apart under corruption, or that he'd let it happen without noticing for this long. At noon, Mama Grace showed up. Sarah helped her in slowly, one arm supporting her frail frame. Grace wore a faded shawl and her usual lipstick, even though her skin had gone pale. Her presence made the diner feel warmer, like the air knew who it was welcoming. When she saw Mike wiping down tables, Grace paused. "You've got Harper shoulders," she said, studying him. John froze mid-wipe. "Excuse me?" She smiled. "You hunch like your father when you lie." Sarah laughed. "Grace, he's just a busboy." But Grace's eyes didn't blink. Maybe." John felt his breath catch. Did she know? Later, during Sarah's short break, Grace beckoned him to her booth. He sat, nervous. "You don't fool me, boy," she said gently. "I knew it was you the moment you fixed that jukebox. Only John would know to tap it twice and push B12. John stared, stunned. "Why didn't you say anything?" Grace's voice was soft. "Because you didn't come here to be found. You came here to remember who you used to be." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Grace smiled, her hands folded calmly. "Would you have come if I had?" Silence. "I didn't think so," she added, not unkindly. John leaned forward. "I want to fix this." "Then start with Sarah," Grace said. "She's been more family to me than anyone else." That night, Greg's laptop mysteriously went missing. So did a flash drive tucked in his desk drawer. And the next morning, when he arrived at work, 2 corporate auditors were already sitting in his office. By lunchtime, he was gone. No goodbye, no tantrum, just the slam of a car door and the screech of tires. Sarah, stunned, turned to John. "What's going on? Why are there auditors here?" John exhaled slowly. "I need to tell you something," he said, but before he could say more, Sarah's eyes widened. "You're not just Mike, are you?" John nodded, the weight of truth finally falling into place. "I'm John Harper. This diner was my mother's, and I think I owe you more than I can ever repay." Sarah didn't speak right away. She just stood there, motionless behind the counter, the coffee pot still in her hand, dripping slowly into an empty mug. The hum of the fridge filled the silence as John, no longer Mike, waited for her to say something. Anything. "You lied," she said finally, not raising her voice. "For how long?" "Since the day I walked in," he admitted. "And Mama Grace knew?" He nodded. "From almost the beginning." Sarah set the pot down gently, like she was afraid anything more forceful would cause it to shatter. She stepped out from behind the counter, brushing past him. "So this whole time, you were watching me?" "No," John said, following her. "I was learning from you." She spun around then, her face flushed. "Don't say that like it's noble. You let me think you were just a guy with bad mop skills and a good heart, but the whole time you were what? Judging? Testing us?" "I was trying to understand what went wrong here," he said softly, "and I found something I didn't expect." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "You," he said. "You're the reason this place still stands. You held it together when Greg was tearing it apart. You gave your paychecks, your time, your life, for my mother. For Grace, Sarah corrected sharply. Not for you. John took a step back, stung. Sarah's voice broke slightly. You don't get to waltz in here in disguise, fix everything with an audit, and walk away like a hero. You abandoned this place, and you abandoned her. He looked down. I know, he said. I did, and I regret it more than anything. There was a long pause between them, filled with things neither one of them had the strength to say. Finally, Sarah let out a breath. What now? I've already put the diner under review. Greg's gone. The stolen money's being traced, and corporate will cover every cent Mama Grace was ever denied. Sarah crossed her arms. And after that? You disappear again? No, John said. I want to stay. I want to help rebuild. Not as your boss, not as Harper the CEO, just as a man trying to make things right. Sarah looked at him, the edge in her eyes softening just slightly. You offered me a job, didn't you? She asked. Corporate trainer, full benefits, all that? He nodded. Yes, you deserve it. She looked away for a long moment, then smiled, sad but sure. I'm not leaving this place. This diner raised me. Grace raised me. I'm not walking away now just because the floors are fixed and the books are clean. John smiled too, though it didn't reach his eyes. I figured you'd say that. But, she added, walking toward the jukebox, if you want to mop floors for real this time, we might just have a space for you in the back. She pressed a button and a new song started to play. Not old, not dusty, hopeful. John looked around, the booths, the counter, the woman who had saved his mother, the place that had shaped his soul. Maybe redemption didn't come with applause. Maybe it came with showing up, day after day, until the wounds stopped bleeding. 2 weeks later, Pinewood Diner looked different, not polished, not perfect, but alive. The cracks in the tiles were still there, but someone had planted flower pots by the windows. The menu had a new cover, hand-drawn by Lily, the dishwasher's daughter. It read, Home isn't a place, it's the people who show up. John sat at booth 3, Grace's old booth, with a cup of coffee he hadn't made himself. He wore the same apron as before. Only now it didn't feel like a disguise. It felt like a uniform he'd earned. Across the booth sat Mama Grace, frail but smiling. A silk scarf covered her thinning hair, and her voice was softer, like paper brushing fabric. Never thought I'd see the day you'd carry a tray and take orders, she said, sipping from a ceramic mug that had Marka 1 Boss scrawled on it in Sharpie. Turns out it's harder than running a billion-dollar company, John said, grinning. You should have led with that back when you thought boardrooms made better families. They both laughed. It felt easy this time. From behind the counter, Sarah was plating pancakes with a focused rhythm. She hadn't changed her mind about leaving. But something between them had shifted. They didn't talk about it, not in grand speeches. But they worked side by side, sharing glances, unspoken truths, and every now and then, a quiet smile. That morning, a developer arrived. He wore polished shoes and carried a briefcase too shiny for Willow Creek. He spoke loudly about revitalization and offered John a figure that could have bought half the town. John looked around the diner, the crooked fan, the humming jukebox, the regulars arguing over pie flavors, and politely declined. The developer left, confused. Sarah noticed. That was a lot of money to say no to. John shrugged. There are things I stopped trying to buy, she smirked. Like forgiveness? He nodded. Or family. That evening, John stood outside the diner as the sun dipped low. He watched as Grace laughed with Lily at the sidewalk chalk drawings. He saw Sarah wipe a table while humming that same lullaby, and he realized something. He had spent years building an empire, chasing success that looked impressive from the outside. But the richest moment of his life had come from a woman using her tip money to save his mother, without expecting anything in return. He turned back toward the diner, pausing at the doorway. Inside, Sarah noticed. Don't just stand there, Harper, she called. We've got dishes piling up, and Grace wants her evening tea. Yes, ma'am, he said, smiling as he stepped inside. The jukebox clicked. A new mural stretched across the far wall, painted in pastels by local kids. It showed a diner, not unlike pine wood, with a crooked sign and glowing windows. Inside the painting, people laughed and worked together. At the center, a small heart, not drawn perfectly, but drawn with love. Beneath it, Lily had painted the words, "Family isn't born, it's built." And this time, John Harper believed every word.